Starting in the early 1900s, the tobacco industry had undergone significant and steady growth. However, in the middle of the 20th century, things were changing for it. Scientists such as Sir Richard Dahl and Sir Austin Bradford Hill were making huge discoveries by connecting lung cancer to cigarettes, and as a result, making people wonder whether society should quit smoking. For fear of losing the public's trust and therefore their money, participating tobacco companies hired Hill and Knowlton, an influential public relations firm. Presidents of the tobacco companies, including Paul M. Hahn, president of the American Tobacco Company, held their first meeting with Hill and Knowlton on December 15, 1953, at the Plaza Hotel in New York City. John W. Hill, president of Hill and Knowlton, and presidents of the tobacco companies proposed that instead of working directly against the science, they should be in mock support of it and encourage more research. The tobacco companies and Hill and Knowlton used many tactics, hiring doctors to tell the public that smoking didn't cause lung cancer, and they even started a research organization called the Tobacco Industry Research Committee, or the TIRC, that did incorrect and biased research. These tactics were very successful and resulted in hundreds of thousands to millions of potential earlier deaths caused by smoking. In 1900, the use of tobacco was a popular habit around the world. Starting in the 1930s, the medical and scientific fields began to identify a correlation between the use of tobacco and increased probability of lung cancer. Large tobacco companies began to employ a variety of strategies to sow doubt into the public trust in these scientific findings, but no individual is more to blame for the loss of millions of people's lives than John W. Hill. The following letter is a letter from John W. Hill to Paul M. Hahn. The letter reads as follows. Dear Paul, Messrs. Litton and Haller of our office had a long session yesterday with Dwight MacDonald, who is writing an article on the cancer problem for the New Yorker. Mr. MacDonald said he had received a letter from the head of a tobacco company, which contained the statement that only a handful of doctors were linking cigarette smoking with cancer. MacDonald thereupon claimed to have located the names of 40 doctors who he says agree with Ochsner, Winder, and Graum, against only about 15 who disputed them. On the basis of research we have done, our people were able to give him the names of 100 doctors who are on record that there is no conclusive evidence that cigarette smoking is a cause of cancer. This list of names was given to Mr. MacDonald, and I am hopeful that it may temper his conclusions. Kind regards. Very sincerely yours, John W. Hill. This document shows how Hill and Knowlton influenced the public through media that the tobacco companies and they had not created. Although there was no conclusive evidence found that Dwight MacDonald actually did change his mind, there is evidence of Hill and Knowlton tampering with the writer's opinions. Hill and Knowlton speaking with MacDonald is evidence that they were able to communicate with writers, and even if they didn't have a good argument, that in itself could have been enough for them to manipulate them. However, Hill and Knowlton had a fairly good argument and were able to give the names of roughly 100 doctors who agreed with them. This shows that Hill and Knowlton focused on mass manipulation through other methods, and once again shows that John W. Hill was crucial to the tobacco industry's success. In 1961, Hill and Knowlton celebrated its successes on behalf of its tobacco client. The total number of cigarettes sold annually had risen from 369 billion in 1954, the company's first full year of service to the industry, to 488 billion. Per capita consumption had risen from 3,344 a year in 1954 to 4,025 in 1961, the highest ever. Although this might be a bit obvious, this is a success for Hill and Knowlton and a loss for science, especially considering the circumstances put in place. Hill and Knowlton came in at a time of crisis for the tobacco industry and got it in what was potentially a better situation than before. It also shows that their tactics were successful in persuading the public. This graph, showing the number of cigarettes sold per adult in various countries, shows just how much Hill and Knowlton caused the tobacco industry to succeed. The green line shows the sales for the U.S. As you can see, the tobacco industry's sales per capita had been decreasing steeply, beginning in 1952. However, a little after Hill & Knowlton was hired in 1954, the sales increased until they hit the highest they had ever been in the U.S. This indicates that Hill & Knowlton, as said earlier, were the sole reason for the industry's success. This letter is from Dr. Clarence Cook Little to John W. Hill. Dr. Clarence Cook Little was the president of the Tobacco Industry Research Committee, which was the research committee that the tobacco companies and Hill & Knowlton set up. Little was writing regarding the concern that he had about how their work wasn't peer-reviewed. In an excerpt, he states, "We have agreed upon and announced the policy that we believe that research results should be commented on or criticized in scientific journals after the publication of the material in which comment or criticism is being made. One of the worst obstacles in stabilizing and rationalizing the whole situation, and in removing it from the realm of public hysteria, is the fact that the press, radio, etc., have employed other less impersonal tactics, and have, without thought or obligation to the public, produced uncertainty and insecurity by laying comments on matters that should be scientifically checked and evaluated." In response, John W. Hill wrote to Paul M. Hahn, "Dear Paul, you will be interested in noting a copy of the letter Dr. Little wrote me, explaining in some detail his philosophy on public statements, together with my reply. While not taking sharp issue with him on any point, I have attempted to show him the need to let the public know that the case has not been proven and closed, but that there are two sides. Kindest personal regards. Very sincerely yours, John W. Hill." These quotes show just how important Hill was to keeping the operation in balance. Dr. Little's rightful uneasiness was something that was a potential threat to their operation, which Hill wrote down. His mediation and convincing were important, greatly for the fact that many of the scientists hired were real scientists, and not completely fake. This is clear evidence of John W. Hill being crucial to this grim plan. To conclude, John W. Hill and his PR firm had an extensive impact on the success of the tobacco industry's propaganda campaign, putting millions of potential lives at risk. Their influence can be seen in records of the amount of cigarettes sold per capita in the U.S. They show that the amount of cigarettes sold per person actually increased from when they were hired to when they stopped working for R.J. Reynolds, Philip Morris, Benson & Hedges, U.S. Tobacco Company, and Brown & Williamson, as opposed to decreasing, as it had been prior to their employment. It can also be observed in Hill's own report of how he convinced a newspaper writer not to write an article that spread information regarding the tobacco lung cancer link. This shows how they tampered with the media. It can also be seen in Hill's report of how he maintained the trust between the Tobacco Industry Research Committee and his clients. It can also be seen in many other records which prove that he and his company were not only involved, but were crucial to success. As well as causing hundreds of thousands or even millions of deaths that potentially wouldn't have happened, the tobacco industry and Hill & Knowlton set an example. While it is argued whether they created the strategy of hiring doctors and scientists to create misleading claims and spread doubt, they had a grim yet highly successful attempt at using it. Other industries would soon follow suit with their own misinformation campaigns, including the oil industry and the Global Climate Coalition. The tobacco industry and the oil industry's misinformation campaigns would be extremely similar, using many of the same strategies and even some of the same researchers. This is why my topic is not only historically significant, but also connects to the theme. For better or worse, by changing the way that other industries approach their own propaganda strategies, the events in which Hill & Knowlton and the tobacco industry created their propaganda scheme were turning points in history.